Hello and welcome to Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, and I'm your host for this program, which is designed to give all of us a little more insight into the doings and goings-on in our capital area. Our guests today are two folks who have a lot of involvement in education and can talk to us a lot about our own Salem-Keizer School District as well as the future of education for the Salem area and for the state. First, we have Kathleen Hanneman, who is the Director of the South Area Operations for the Salem-Keizer School District. We also have George Dyer, who is the principal of South Salem High School and is the president-elect of the Association of Secondary School Principals. Welcome to Capital Insight.
Thank you.
I hope people can identify who Kathleen is and who George is. And what I'd like to do is develop a little background information from each of you so that folks have a little bit more personal knowledge. Kathleen, can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing, where you're from, and that sort of thing?
Okay, well originally, Kevin, I'm from the East Coast. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I was an English teacher and a yearbook newspaper advisor in my teaching days. Came to Oregon in 1977 and was both a teacher and acting principal of Hillcrest School of Oregon here in Salem. Then was an assistant principal at North Salem High School and principal of McNary High School, and then principal of Judson Middle Schools and a little temporary time as principal of Walker Middle School, and now in my present position as South Area Director.
How long have you been the South Area Director?
It's been 4 years.
Now, when did you come out here then?
1977.
77. So you've got about, well, you're 3 years short of 20 years out
That's
here.
right. Very much enjoying being in Oregon. It's a wonderful state.
Well, George, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was born and raised in the Dalles, Oregon, and came to Salem in 1965 to begin my undergraduate study at Willamette University, and graduated from there in 1969. Taught for 10 years at North Salem High School, 3 years at McKay High School. Then I was the district social studies coordinator for 3 years, and in 1985 I became an assistant principal of South Salem, and then in 1990 I became the principal. Been there since.
Well, both of you seem to have a lot of continuity in this area, and that raises an interesting question for me. Do we have this kind of continuity with most of the staff? And I'll ask you, George, about that.
I think so. A great number of our teaching staff at South Salem have either been from this area. In fact, many of them are South Salem graduates. But at South, and I think most of the schools in the Salem-Keizer area, you'll find that staff has been in a particular building for an extended period of time.
Now, as principal, folks have a lot of images, and they're probably mixed images depending on what generation they're from and where they went to school. What kind of role do you play in a secondary school today as principal?
Well, I think the principal today is a multifaceted job. Not only is the principal seen as the manager of the school, but they're also seen as the educational leader. They're seen as the contact person for parents when there are issues which come up. Principals are also seen as kind of change agents, I believe, in our district and in our educational system. So we play many roles for many people, and it's like 17 different platters that you're trying to balance in the air. And it's a really exciting and challenging position.
Well then, Kathleen, your role as Director of South Area Operations, can you explain to us a little bit about how we have the Salem-Keizer School District divided up this way?
Right. What we have, Kevin, in the Salem-Keizer School District is a division into 5 areas. So each high school has what we call just a feeder area or a geographic area that's comprised of schools K-12. So there are 11 schools in the South area, South Salem High School being the high school, and then Walker and Leslie Middle Schools, and then a number of elementary schools. And the theory behind the division is that we want to do a better job, K-12, of working together, articulating our programs, elementary, middle school, high school, working with parents, working with the various issues that are germane to a certain geographic area. So, you know, we're attempting to do a better job of communicating with each other. And we believe we've been successful. I know our superintendent, Dr. Homer Kearns, has worked very hard on the area concept, and we believe it's working well.
Now, what is your role as director of the area? Sounds like a super principal, but what is it really?
Well, and I do have a super principal here. George has done just a great job and certainly a leader in our area. I want to compliment him. But in our roles as area directors, what we do is, one of the things is hire supervised principals. We work with budgets. We also have a lot of responsibility for working with the resolution of issues and problems in our area. Some of the area directors have a level responsibility, and mine is middle schools, so I also coordinate the instructional programs in the middle schools.
With the other areas, you mean?
Right, and so that I meet twice a month with all of our 6 middle school principals, and we're also working on preparations for, we're doing a total restructuring of our middle schools, and in the 95-96 school year, we will be moving our 6th graders, improving our education in our middle school. So I also have that responsibility.
Well, you've got almost like, I'll use the name, but it's not appropriate for the title here, but almost like an associate superintendent position where you're in charge of all levels, all the way K through 12 basically, for one area. Isn't that the way it's working now?
Sort of, yes.
And then yet you also have a horizontal connection then for all the middle schools to provide a program connection among all the schools.
Right, right. And so we have vertical and horizontal responsibility. And when we do staff development, or when we do work with principals, we also do it with both levels. Both George has monthly meetings with all the high school principals, and they work together on budget, and then we also work as an area on various issues. So, and we think it strengthens our school district. We think that the way we're organized strengthens the district, because I was a principal during a time when we were strictly limited by our levels. And so the high school principals met and we worked together, but we didn't have a lot of connection or as much communication as we needed to have with elementary and middle school. So we've worked hard to try to do a better job. And we have, George is involved with the network grant, and maybe he could talk a little bit about that, but that involves articulation with all 3 levels.
I wish you would talk about that in terms of working with the levels, and also in terms of how you might work with the other principals, because there must be some things of common concern that come up. Can you give us some idea about that?
Sure. I think one of the things that the area concept also does is gets the decision-making closer to the buildings, because having an area concept and a K-12 concept, Mrs. Hanneman has to deal with all of the issues that the schools are facing, and so she's very familiar with those for the South area, for instance, and I believe that's true for all the other areas too. What we have done is in the South area we've put together what we call a consortium group, and we have teacher leaders and principals from the elementary schools, from our 2 feeder middle schools, and then of course the high school, and we're working together to talk about and to decide what is it that's important for young people to learn K-12, so that we aren't duplicating, so that we aren't getting the same material to students at different levels at different times, so that we're more coordinated in terms of our efforts in education. And normally we think of, gee, school system, you would be talking with one another, but very seldom did the levels talk to one another before we had the area concept.
Well, shouldn't we acknowledge some statistics here? Now, the last time I paid attention, weren't we talking 24,000 students in the school district? Are we above that now, or below, or somewhere in there?
We will be close to 31,000 students next year. So we have been growing. For a number of years, we were growing by about 1,000 students per year.
Wow.
And we are growing quickly. Hence the reason for the building that we're doing and the constructing of new facilities.
About how many schools do we have in the system then for Salem-Keizer schools?
We have 50 right now. We have 37 elementary schools, 6 middle schools, 5 high schools. We have alternative education schools, and we're preparing to open new schools next year. So we are growing.
Well, the last time I paid attention, I better check on this one too. The Salem-Keizer School District was, I think, the 2nd largest in the state?
Yes.
Are you still in that category?
Yes.
Yes.
My goodness. Well, in terms of administration now, a lot of citizens will say, I bet you have tons of administrators out there Can you talk a little bit about the administrator to student ratio, administrator to faculty ratio, which my perception is the opposite of what I hear from the voters. When I go out and I talk to administrators, it sounds like the ratio is actually going down rather than going up. Can you explain that?
Yes, I'll just talk about middle school since I do that budget, Kevin. In our middle schools, we'll be having next year, we've got 6 middle schools. 4 of those middle schools will be close to 1,000 students, and you've got 2 administrators, a principal and an assistant principal. So I don't think by any measure we have too many administrators. I think we have just the opposite. We are lean. I think our administrators are doing a good job. George many times works an 80-hour week. Principals are out, many nights, many early mornings, and they work very hard. So, I do not think in our district that we do have too many administrators.
Well, we're facing a financial challenge for the Salem-Keizer School District, which is officially the 24J school district under the state's numbering system. And I suppose many school districts, we certainly read about the problems that the Portland School District is having. And as we're looking at the financial challenge for the next biennium, in terms of your budget planning, we've been reading about some of the cutbacks that are proposed. How does this affect the job that you're doing at the administrative level as principal and as area director in trying to deliver services to the kids?
Well, I can answer just in terms of what we're looking at. We are very worried about the next couple of years in education. I mean, we right now are dealing with how to make those reductions, how to both plan for reductions next year and continue meeting the needs of students. How can we operate differently with fewer resources? It's a major issue, and we are very, very concerned about next year.
I think this school year, for instance, we're talking the average class size is 27 students to 1 teacher at the high school level. In fact, grades 3 through 12, we're talking about 27 to 1. Next year, we're going to be going probably around 30 to 1. The year after that, I venture to guess what that might be, but it's going to be as bad, if not worse, than this year. So what that means is that teachers have to learn how to do the same with less. And that's going to be difficult in order to retrain, first of all, staff on how you try to do your job in a different manner with more students, how you retrain parents who expect the same services but are really having less resources plowed into the system. And what we're doing is trying to look at an institution that basically hasn't changed over the last 80 years and begin to change that to meet the economic realities that we're facing.
Well, George, you just touched an interesting hot button, which would be, what are we doing to change, to bring about school improvement, to adjust education, to deal with the next century, of course, also to deal with the next year? I'll let you pick up on that, then I'll switch over to Kathleen on that topic.
Well, I believe that the legislature passed about 4 years ago the Oregon Educational Act for the 21st century. And that act suggested several types of changes that Oregon education needed to be moving toward. And some of those included a difference in the way in which we use the classroom. Right now, our general concept of how we deal with educating young people is teacher is standing up in front of the classroom and is lecturing to 27 or 30 kids, and we expect students to take all this information in and to deal with it and to process it. But I believe that the Educational Act is suggesting to us, and I believe rightly, that young people have changed, and so is the social and economic realities of the time. What we're moving toward, I believe, is a decade and a century where the media is going to be far more important than maybe what it even has been during the 20th century. I believe that teachers will become more like coaches than pontificators. I think that we're going to find teachers helping students, motivating students to go certain directions with their education, and giving them the resources and the knowledge of where to find information in order to meet the kind of skills needs that they will need for the 21st century.
All right, well, as we deal with that, Kathleen, I'd like you to respond to the same question, but I'll also throw another zinger that I hear from folks, and that is, how are we going to test progress, and how are we going to have benchmarks for individual students if they're developing what's been described as their educational portfolio, being coached and all of that, but at what point do we turn to them and say, all right, now show us what you know and give us something that's sellable and marketable for, say, college admissions authorities or for employers? It used to be you could look at grades and you could look at a high school diploma. Can you give us some notion about how we would deal with that?
Yes. I think, Kevin, that one thing the Oregon Educational Act has done is, I believe, move us into even more accountability. We will have benchmarks. We will have state assessments. We are looking at portfolios as being a good way. They are a good way to assess students, looking at a gamut of information and being able to collect documents that demonstrate what a student actually knows. You know, I believe that we will be moving into much greater accountability as a result of this law. I think the public also demands accountability, and I think that's one of the things that we're working with all of our schools on is, you know, trying to meet the expectations that the community, the business world, all of our constituencies are telling us that they want to see in schools. They want to see us be accountable. They want students to have skills to be part of the workforce in the next century. So I think, you know, all in all, the law has been a good one. I think we are much more accountable. One of the things I was going to mention in terms of how education is changing is that with the Oregon Educational Act, we now have mandated site councils at our schools. And those site councils really augment that whole school governance notion in a school, where it used to be the principal who would be the decision maker at all times. It is now basically a site council, 51% of whom are teachers. We have parents on those site councils. In some cases, we have students on those site councils. And so the model of school governance has changed quite a bit, and it's much better, I believe, than the way things used to be in schools.
Let me pause for a moment and mention to our audience that you're with us on Capital Insight. I'm State Representative Kevin Mannix from Salem, and I'm your host. Our guests today are Kathleen Hanneman, who is the South Area Director for the Salem-Keizer School District. We also have George Dyer, who is the principal of South Salem High School. If you ever have any questions or concerns, feel free to write to me at Capital Insight, H395, State Capitol, Salem, Oregon, 97310. We're always happy to hear from you. Turning back to the issue you were just talking about, one of the concerns I hear, though, is that, well, should the site councils have more parents on them as opposed to the number of teachers that are involved? And I suppose maybe that's more of a political issue than an education issue, but maybe not. Maybe it's an education issue. Are the governance provisions in the Education Act broad enough and generous enough to allow all parties to be actively involved?
Well, I believe, Kevin, and George can also answer this, but I believe the rule of having 51% teachers is a good one. I think the teachers are the experts. They're in the classrooms. They have expertise in instruction and instructional strategies that work with different kinds of students. So I think the bulk of that site council needs to be in instruction. I think, however, that is very important that parents be involved. And I am seeing personally, 20-some years in education, many more parents involved in education than in the past. I mean, I think not only the act, but more parents are realizing that that they can help strengthen schools when they are involved. So I think the site councils, while the majority of the membership is certainly teachers, I think that we do have parent involvement, and that's good, positive.
Well, George, on the parent involvement side, I'm curious as to a progression that may occur or may not occur. Do parents get involved when their kids first get in school and stay that way, or do some of them just become involved at the high school level? From your perspective, I mean, actually your varied background through the years, what have you seen in terms of parental involvement, and how has that changed?
Well, it's interesting. I have a focus group that meets once a month where we talk about a variety of issues surrounding South Salem High School. We were talking about this very issue last Friday with this focus group. And the belief is, and I concur with this, that in elementary school, parents are really excited about their youngsters going off to school and seem to have a lot of time for school activities and are involved in that. And I know with my children, I found the same there, that my wife and I got very involved in the elementary school. But as students get older and as they progress up the educational ladder to middle school and then to senior high school, we seem to see a drop-off in terms of parent involvement in the classroom and in the school itself. Now, I believe that at South Salem, and I believe in most of our high schools in Salem-Keizer, we have a lot of parents who are involved in helping the schools. But in terms of getting in the classroom and helping the individual teacher, there's kind of a no, we don't do that at the secondary level. And I think that's for several reasons. I think for one reason, parents believe that their kids don't want them in high school or middle school. They're embarrassed by that. And to some extent, I think that's true. But I think we've got to start telling parents that whether the kid's embarrassed about that or not, we need you in the schools and in the classrooms helping us out. I don't believe that educators can do what we've done in the past and with the resources that we have unless we have more parent involvement.
Is one way to do that to get parents involved, at least at the periphery? I mean, athletics comes to mind. Student activities, I attended Guys and Dolls at McKay recently, and I was surprised that we just brought our kids for the fun of it. They're still not even high school age, but I was surprised to see a substantial number of parents coming, probably to watch their own kids in the play. But is there a trend or something that you can do to sort of bring the parents in the periphery and then get them closer and closer to the core, which is academics?
Well, we find, for instance, at the freshman level, the co-curricular programs tend to bring the parents into the school. And as they become more familiar with the school and with the staff, then they become easier about coming in and helping out in other areas. Where we've really got to get parents involved at the secondary level is in the classroom. Often parents will help with the clerical situations, with the co-curricular, the athletic and the drama and that sort of thing. But we really need help in the classroom, helping that classroom teacher, being a mentor for students who don't have that kind of adult role enough in their life. And that's what I'm going to be working on in the next few years, particularly, is how do we develop these mentorships in the classroom for young people? How do we get parents more involved? How do we get senior citizens more involved? I believe that's a vast area of untapped resources that we have in this community that we need to be taking advantage of.
Is there some way to try to build on this volunteer pool and to get it more coordinated and more integrated? This is an issue that I'm bringing up with a lot of folks in a lot of areas of government. That is bringing folks in on a volunteer basis, but on a very organized, coordinated basis, and maybe even giving them some rewards for doing this, because at some point there may be the burnout syndrome where there's less of a feeling of a quid pro quo unless you have something. One crazy idea, and I'll just mention this off the cuff that I've had, is that we ought to have an organized volunteer program where if a person lacks health insurance but puts in a certain number of clear hours of community service for defined activities such as working in the schools or whatever else, that they might, as part of their agreement with the state, be able to qualify for health insurance. I'm just throwing that out. Instead, we're talking about giving away health insurance to folks who don't have it, and or requiring employers to pay for it when the employers say they can't afford it. And I don't want to draw you into those other peripheral issues that get you away from education, but are there some systems of rewards that we might contemplate trying to establish without state mandates? That we have enough problems with state mandates, but is there any discussion about creative ways of pulling parents in, or is it just, well, keep encouraging them? Kathleen, I'll throw that at you.
Well, we do have, Kevin, in our district an organized volunteer center. So we have it's pretty well defined, well orchestrated. And we've got many, many volunteers in our district who work throughout our school system. I think George was talking about secondary schools because we are attempting to do things to bring more parents into secondary schools. I totally agree with George. We would embrace any notion in terms of what things that, looking at creative ways, things that we can do to get more assistance, more support for those classroom teachers. And we do believe, we're doing some things, but we have to go beyond the booster clubs, bake sales, music boosters, and so on, and begin to assist in instruction.
And let me pick up on that just again. Say we have a welfare mother who's got a couple of school-age kids. Should the state be saying, as a condition of your continued participation in welfare, you must also be participating in your kids' school? Now, whatever the level of participation is something for you to work out with the school, but I'm just throwing this out. I'm not picking on welfare folks, except those are folks who are receiving a benefit from the state and from the federal government through the state. Is there some way, because it seems to me that we need to sort of make folks more responsible to be helping out too, and that there's a hook there. And maybe we could say to other parents, well, you have an academic capability. Why don't you come into school and say you're a science professor at a university? Well, why don't you come in and help the science curriculum a little bit? Are we imposing too much on people if we start talking about that? That's a philosophical question. I'll throw it at you, George.
Okay. I think we need to be looking at all sorts of new ideas in order to bring people into the schools, as well as ways of getting the young people out of the schools into the community. Mm-hmm. And it's a two-way street. I think for too long we've seen schools as buildings housing kids instead of seeing schools as part of the community, and instead of young people seeing that they're a part of a community too. So I think it's a two-way street, but I definitely agree. I think we need to be looking at all sorts of ways of encouraging participation in all government agencies by the public. And so I guess I would be favorably inclined to look at that, as well as probably many other ideas that might be out there.
Kathleen, did you want to comment on that?
No, I agree. I believe that many of those, what you're talking about, welfare mothers, many of those young women were women who may not have had success in our school system. So we would have to work with them in helping them transition into a place where they could help support their own children.
Maybe that could tie in with the Jobs and Jobs Plus programs, where we're trying to encourage them to get the right kind of training and education to get into the workforce. Maybe we could say, as part of that, you should just develop a better relationship with the school system. Because yeah, I can see the difficulty. If you bring in someone, I'll be blunt and say, who's dysfunctional in terms of the educational system, they may get in your way rather than be helping you, because you're trying to educate them at the same time you're trying to educate the child. Well, I was just throwing that out as an idea, but it seems to me that Salem Keizer School District's been pretty flexible about trying to come up with ways to get parents involved. Mm-hmm. We've only got a couple of minutes left, and I'm curious about the future direction of education for Oregon, and I wanted to give you each a little time to comment on that. Year-round schools is one thing that's come up, or the longer school year. I think it's 220 days under the Educational Act that's been proposed. Any thoughts on where we're headed, Kathleen?
Well, in terms of the longer school year, we are facing a major funding crisis in our state, and a longer school year will cost us money, and that's something. While many of us would embrace the notion of moving away from our agricultural year in the school system, we are concerned when we look at the price tag. So I think, you know, while we know that we would like to increase the number of instructional days, I think all of us would, there is a price tag. And right now, in this funding crisis, our major concern is just how to move into next year and buffer the hurts to students, the difficulty that we'll face next year.
George?
Well, I'm a very proud Oregonian, and I don't want to see this state take on the situation that I've seen California go through with their Prop 13. And I hope that we can arrive at some kind of funding solution to the problems of education in the state of Oregon.
Well, as we go through all of this, it sounds to me like what we really have to deal with in the short term are some heavy-duty issues about the next couple of years, perhaps the next 4 years. At the same time, we still need to keep in mind the bigger picture, the backdrop of where we want to go, the long-term goals for the system, without forgetting about the kids that are in there right now. We've got to deal with them. Right. Well, I appreciate the insight that you've both offered us, and I appreciate our audience joining us on Capital Insight. Our time is about wrapped up. I'd like to thank Kathleen Hanneman for being our guest, and George Dyer. And again, thanks to you in the audience for joining us on Capital Insight. We'll see you again next time.